Awesome. Thank you very much, Dion. Okay, he's set the bar quite high. We've got to go make this exciting, make sure it's useful for people and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure we're going to go and do it. Let's start at the beginning, Tony. What's your background? I'm super excited that we've got you on the call. I think this is a catch of note for us, but why don't you just give us a bit about your background? Maybe it'll become clear to those listening why I feel that way.
Oh, thank you, Colin. A real pleasure to be here. What would have been even better than, doing this virtually would have been if I was with you there in Joburg, one of my favorite cities and one of my favorite countries to be in. But hey, we'll make do. So my background is 35 years. Oh God, has it been that long? In the IT and global business services industry. I was 27 years with Procter and Gamble. I had the privilege of, quite literally growing up with the IT and global business services, shared services industry. I helped set up the first ever shared services center in the Philippines in 1993, and then was program leader for a really big outsourcing deal, about 2/3 of P&G's IT and shared services globally, which was a 10-year, $8 billion deal, which kind of triggered off the whole outsourcing industry. And then, of course, routine operations, running day-to-day operations for P&G's IT and GBS in every region of the world. Then eventually, I had the privilege of essentially dealing with a somewhat ironic issue, which is, what do you do if the industry considers your organization to be best in class in IT and GBS, but you've got tremendous opportunity. So what's the next generation? And if there is none, how do you create it? So I set up the equivalent of a Google X, the organization you guys know, which does 10x moonshot disruptive thinking type of work for the whole world, driverless cars, balloon internet, so on and so forth. So I created for the industry the equivalent of that, along with 5 or 6 of the largest IT companies, IBM, HP, Tata, so on and so forth. And then, some of the biggest venture capitalists in the world, not so much for the money, but for the access to the startups. And we dealt with interesting issues like, why should processes like invoicing exist? Why should, you have people instead of robots doing actually smart buying and procurement? By the way, these were not early upstream innovation ideas. Each of those was a $50 million project that was actually implemented. So that's that. And then about 2 years ago, I decided to try and do something different. So therefore transform it, which I used to consult and work with maybe about 20 of the Fortune 100 companies, mostly doing strategy and for digital as well as shared services at the board and the CXO, CEO level. So here we are, Colin. We've had occasion to speak in the past, and it's always a pleasure to chat with you. So I'm looking forward to this.
Thanks very much. Now, one of the things that you did when you left is you decided to write a book, which I find a rather scary proposition. But it ended up being a very good book, Why Digital Transformations Fail. I've read it. I find it absolutely fascinating and on point. And I'm not the only one, because you've come in the top charts. You're number 1, I think, in the change management section for Amazon, which is just an incredible. What was it that led you to want to write this book?
Oh, other than sheer boredom? No, I'm joking. Now, I always felt like I would like to write a book. I mean, when I was in school, college magazines, all that kind of stuff. So I actually do like writing. And then, when I actually started to think about doing that, I talked to a few author friends about actually writing a fiction book, and they said, hey, stay within your wheelhouse. You know nothing about fiction. Why don't you write about IT and digital transformation? So that's been on the roadmap for a long time. And then, when I created this next generation services, again, the moonshot for internal business operations disruption, transformation, I ended up with a lot of material. But, more than that, I ended up with a conviction that, the world is in the throes of the fourth industrial revolution, which is both an incredible disruption, but also the opportunity of a lifetime for most of us as professionals. I had the distinct privilege of having the resources to, go out and talk to quite literally hundreds of companies and learn about, both how to make things successful and failures. And it just strikes me as crazy that, the main weapon that the world has to survive the fourth industrial revolution is basically digital transformation. And that's a $1 trillion industry. And 70% of those efforts fail, which is an incredible waste. But it's also, as I said, an incredible opportunity. So,
well,
put two and two together, and that's what led to the book. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Let's dig into that now and say, what is a digital transformation? Last week, we had Andy Baker on, who I respect immensely. He's the CTO of ABSA, and as was said on the intro there, has a very, very different way of thinking than most CTOs do, one which I really do subscribe to. But he said that there's a huge difference between, digitizing and being digital. What do you mean by digital transformation? Because I've had this question from clients recently, and it's actually not that easy to explain. At least I don't think so.
No, it is not easy, and quite honestly, the issue is simply language, right? Because the term digital has been around quite literally for many decades, and the word had different meanings. Again, from digital watches in the 70s to what we're talking about now. So language is important. So here's my take on what I mean by digital transformation. I like to put this in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, because I think that's the most important thing that's happening around us, right? So, you need companies that are successful, or at least surviving in the third industrial revolution, to be able to continue to exist in the fourth industrial revolution era. My way of defining that is all of the things that are acting against those companies' survival is what we call digital disruption. Therefore, digital transformation is basically the antidote. It has got to be the rewiring of people, processes, business models, products, and people. And I say people twice because, like Dion, I believe that this is a human challenge. Yeah? And so in my mind, digital transformation is not technology. It is not a project. It is basically, how do you do a Netflix over and over again? How do you disrupt yourself? How do you continue to be successful in Wall Street's eyes, in your organization's eyes, in the world's eyes, by disrupting yourself before somebody else disrupts you?
Okay, let's dig into that. So 4IR, is this more myth and fantasy? Is this the kind of very clever marketing from Peter Diamandis and his colleagues at Singularity University, and a good friend of mine as well from Sally and Ishmael, who've really, sort of nailed it? Or is this actually reality and we're living it now?
It's reality. Let's make no mistake about it. And again, we don't have to kind of believe the hype. I think we always should look at the data, right? That's one of the reasons why I define success and digital transformation in the way that the World Economic Forum, Wall Street, everybody else would define successes in businesses, right? And you can do the same in government, technology, and so on and so forth, right? But let's look at the data, right? The reality is that the lifespan of a Fortune 500 company is dramatically shrinking. The reality is that industry after industry, starting with retail, but all the way up to things that we always thought of as intensely human activities. When you have small claims courts being managed by AI robots in Latvia and China instead of humans, when you've got things such as lip reading being done more accurately by computers than humans, you know that this is disruption, right? And again, the question you ask is a good one, because anytime there is a disruptive technology, there's incredible hype. So the issue is not, whether the disruption is real or not. The issue is how much is hype and how much is reality. And my answer to that is there's only one measure to it: the way the world measures everything, right? If you're a company, it's Wall Street returns. If you are an individual, it's basically, knowledge learning. If you're a government, it's basically, services and the opinion of your economic results and your organization. And then based on that, I agree with the World Economic Forum, which basically says we are in the midst of an industrial revolution.
Okay, so let's assume that's correct. And I certainly subscribe to it. There's too much evidence. Maybe we're in the trough of disillusionment for a couple of technologies like drones, for example, but they're coming on strong. But there's just too much evidence of the impact of AI, too much happening with companies like, OpenAI, for example, and what Microsoft are doing. There's just too much stuff, that's happening. I think for organizations that want to go and do a digital transformation, it's critical they believe that this fourth industrial revolution is real. Otherwise, they're not going to see it as the threat and or the opportunity that it actually is. So let's assume that everyone on the call is now at that space. They're singularity'd up. What do they start to do next? How do you start to go and change your organization from something that's a bit more linear, a bit more people, a bit more manufacturing era, to something which is a bit more googly? You mentioned, the X company.
Yes. So and that's a very nice lead-in to why digital transformations fail, right? So here's what I believe. It is, as you say, an imperative for us. There is mass failure out there, and I strongly believe that the reason why there's failure, which will then lead to what should you do first, is for two very simple reasons. One is because language. Most people are not clear about what digital transformation means in their own context. And then secondly, once they understand what it means, then the execution methodology that's used to actually get it done is still incomplete and incorrect, right? I'm going to just joke a little bit about it because, I equate this a little bit to Alice in Wonderland and the anecdote between Alice and the Cheshire Cat, where Alice says, "Which way should I go?" The cat says, "Well, it depends on where you want to get to." Alice says, "Don't really care." And then the cat says, "Fine, it doesn't matter which way you go." But I'm only just joking, but that is quite literally the conversations that, I have with many of these very, very large companies. Because boards and leaders have recognized that we're in the midst of an industrial revolution. They know they want to do digital transformation, but they're stuck at the very question you asked, which is, what should I do first? The first is, define digital transformation correctly. It is not a technology. It is not a project. It is basically, if you're running a company, then it is one of three things. You're going to have to completely change your business model. You're going to have to go from, regular products to smart products, like cars to smart cars, so on and so forth. And the third is you're going to have to dramatically improve your internal business operations, because startups have a 2x advantage on cost and a 10x advantage on speed in the way they internally run their organizations. So you have to be clear that that is success, right? Setting up a, innovation shop in Silicon Valley, that is not success. Playing around with AI, that's not success. When Wall Street says your business model has dramatically changed, your productivity has doubled, so on and so forth, that's success. So that's the first step. It's up to the leadership to say, that's what it is. Second, when you start to do that, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You have a good working operating model and stuff like that. Don't change everything. Be extremely disciplined the same way Google is, using a formula called 70-20-10, 70% of resources on operations, 20% on continuous improvement, 10% on disrupting yourself. You don't have to use those ratios because they are from another industry. In my case, it was more like 80, 19.5, 0.5. But the fact is, you have to have a portfolio approach to disrupting yourself. You don't just throw money, you don't just throw technology, you act like a venture capitalist. You invest in 10 big ideas. Each of them could be hundreds of millions of dollars. 9 of them may fail. One of them is going to change the complexion of your company and the work that you do. So that's what I mean by a very disciplined execution approach as well as definition.
So let's start at the beginning then. We'll go on to the execution methodology perhaps in the second half. How do you get started on that? Because what you've just described is quite scary and I think radically different to what most executive teams are used to doing. And the problem I think that they've got is they are paid to be incremental.
Yes.
They are paid not to take risk. They're paid to generate short-term returns. And therefore, it's quite easy to end up in a constraint where even if you believe the world is changing exponentially, you're delivering incrementally based on your legacy and the returns and the margins that you've been generating for the last 2 or 3 years. You must have found that at Procter & Gamble, right? Because you had to go through a transformation. How did you go through that mind shift change? And how did you get your colleagues to start going through this different way of looking at things?
So I think it is situational in the sense that, you're correct. For most leaders, even if you believe in the importance of Wall Street and stuff like that, even Wall Street rewards short-term results, not long-term results, right? For most organizations, you basically have to go back to your beliefs as a leader to say, do you basically want to be remembered? Is your legacy going to be, he or she did fine for the few years that they were at the helm, but that the company collapsed, and thanks to them, right? So that's what you have to really ask yourself. And I believe at the core of most good leaders is the understanding and the conviction that no, of course they want to win in the short term and in the long term, right? Now that's different. As I said, it's situational, because if you have an existential crisis, if you have a burning platform, then forget it. You're not going to do stuff like regularly invest in venture capitalist type ventures, right? But that's thankfully not the case. So once you do that, then, and this is really why I love the Fourth Industrial Revolution framework, then you have to realize that the business strategies that you use in normal times fail during Industrial Revolution times. And we all know that. I mean, because no amount of continuous improvement of the horse carriage would lead you to the internal combustion engine, right? And this is really where academics and company leaders know, because, there have been people, at Harvard under Clay Christensen and others that have talked about this third leg of the strategy, which is disruptive innovation, right? So then the question becomes, how do you do that in a disciplined manner? Most good companies already do have that strategy of disruptive innovation, but they're blindly throwing stuff at disruptive innovation. They are, to use the term that you talked about earlier, they are doing digital. They are not being digital, right?
Let's just pause there, because we're going to come on to that. I still want to know what the board can do, or the board themselves, to get that mind shift change, because I'm not convinced. Maybe it's because of geography that I'm in. Maybe that's totally unfair. But I'm just not convinced most leaders are able at this point to take this step. You're quite rare at Procter & Gamble. And I'm just wondering what they can do to try to go and get that mind shift, going. For example, I believe that you were at Singularity, and then you had a strong relationship with people like Salim, which you're able to bring into the organization. A lot of people that do that go back and they end up getting thrown out of their organization because what they're saying is just complete madness.
Yes.
But the reality is that if you want the board and the exco to start putting together ideas, how do you get them to stop thinking a big SAP implementation or a large Salesforce implementation is going digital, as opposed to we've got to start running, which we're going to go on to in a minute, these 10 projects of significant size on a portfolio basis, of which most will fail, and we're willing to explain that to our shareholders and investors. How do you get them to do that movement?
How do you get them to come along? That's a fantastic question, Colin. So I'll share with you what I did and what I recommend people to do to bring along their boards and their leadership, right? Um, First part of the strategy is, shock therapy, right? So Singularity and Salim, Ismail, and others, I mean, they do these sessions, which are called awake sessions, where you basically take people, leaders, out of their normal operating context, and then you show them disruption happening, even as they speak. Um, so one of the things I used to do, I still do now with other companies, this was pre-COVID, is actually take them to Silicon Valley, have them talk and see other companies and see how disruption is near, right? I'll give you an example. Um, every company in the world, let's take a boring example of internal business operations, travel expense management, right? Every company in the world, most companies in the world do travel expense reporting. The hated task of actually creating an expense report, sending it out, stuff like that. Um, Google, Adobe, most of the companies that are operating in a different era from us, they don't do that. They use data. So if you want to travel from Joburg to New York, there is data in the system that says, Colin, your budget should be, I'm going to make this up, but let's say $10,000. At that point in time, you're done. As long as you use the corporate card, your travel and expense report is pretty much made for itself, right? And you're freed as an employee to then decide whether you're going to use the corporate travel agency or Google Flights or your friend's airplane or whatever it is. If you spend money, use the card. If you don't, you save some money, then that money is gain share. Now I use this as an example to help bring the leadership along to say there is an alternative that exists. I was blown out of my mind 5 years ago when I was trying to set up a meeting with the CEO of a small sized company. And we were going back and forth on email, playing email tag. And eventually the CEO said, fine, I'll just ask Amy, who I assumed was his admin. It's in the book. You probably read the example to set this up. And Amy came out with a perfect email in context, stuff like that. It was only later I discovered that Amy was a robot. Here's the difference between a startup and large companies. Larger companies are risk averse, so they ask questions which are wrong, like, is AI ready for me? Smaller companies ask the question differently. Is the use case of calendaring using email ready? And if that's the case, why am I not using that? So the first step to your question is you have to make people aware and you have to shake them up to say, this stuff is not vaporware. It exists and it is being used. The second is you have to use real data to say, the operating cost per revenue in these startups, which are, by the way, your real competition, even on products, is half of ours, right? And even if we think we're best in class, this is a problem. Once you share that data, I mean, you can only do so much. You can take, the horse to the water. You can't make it drink. My belief is that, my experience is that 80% of the times, then the next question comes out, which is, can you show me how to do that without wasting time and money? Because that's exactly what is happening. I'm throwing money away. I don't believe I can do this in my company. Is there a better way to do this? Which essentially then gets us to execution.
So let's go into that. Let's run. I mean, I certainly see really good examples. I mean, here locally, Capitec, their leadership team, they regularly go and visit and explore. I call it outside-in thinking, doing everything you can at a senior level to get out of your organization, to go and explore and to be challenged and to rethink. So over a period of 3 to 6 months, the board and the exco have started to go and change their mindsets. They're either panicking or quite excited about it. But now, what next? Where do they get started on this?
So I think where they need to get started is, again, in this discipline framework of creating a strategy. Now, by the way, again, language is important. This is not a digital strategy. It's a new business strategy enabling the organization to act in the fourth industrial revolution area, which happens to use digital technology, right? And that distinction is really, really important because when companies do things like they appoint a chief digital officer, or they say we are going to disrupt ourselves, and they create a team, all that they're doing is basically what I call innovation theater, right? Very, very cool projects, very good examples. However, their reward systems on the day-to-day basis is for continuity, right? Because you're not going to throw away the profitability and your organization and stuff like that. Good companies, whether it's GE or P&G, that have existed for hundreds of years, in P&G's case more than 180 years, is because that stability that comes in, that actually allows these companies to weather major earthquakes in the economy. So don't get me wrong. I mean, I know we as innovation leaders sometimes love to talk about the immune system and how change management is hard and stuff like that. But we have to recognize that it exists for a reason. It is our job as change leaders to then come out with a clear strategy on how you are going to transform the company, not the technology, not the platform, not SAP, how you're going to transform the company. So that's what I mean by it's a new business strategy, not a digital strategy. So in my case, it was very, very simple. It was basically using this framework of, 70, 20, 10, or in my case, as I said, 80 and 19 and a half and half, whatever it is, to say, okay, in IT and global business services, we may have, 15,000 FTEs, including ours and our partners. But, why don't we just take very, very senior, like director level, about a dozen people, and then create this ecosystem. And we're going to be in the business of applied disruption. So we're not going to essentially create products like X does. But what we're going to do is we take business problems. Why should you have 400 people doing disputes on receivables? Why can you not actually do that better? And then we're going to reach out to startups and find startups that are actually working on implementing those, except that they're not enterprise hardened, they're not enterprise ready. And our job will be to essentially change manage, to enterprise harden those existing use cases, and then to drive change, reward systems, training, process change back in the company, right? So that's the key. I think a very different approach to the way most companies do upstream innovation in their companies.
Let's just understand a couple of things there. When you say strategy always is a word that makes me feel like, oh, in 3 months we'll have done this, and at 6 months we'll have delivered that, and we'll have a milestone at 12 months. And it's also obvious what's happening over the next 3 years. And within that strategy, we're going to have to make sure we employ about 6, system architects, because it's really obvious how to go and structure our tech stack. And then we're just going to go and execute after that 3 to 6 months of analysis, and just paint by numbers, make sure that the people are executing on time. Is that what you're suggesting?
No. And that's a good clarification. So when I talk about strategy, I'm really talking about, and again, I'm using industry rather than government as an example here. I'm talking about, those 3 changes that I talked about earlier. Change the company business model. So if you happen to be in the manufacturing and selling to physical stores, a new business model, as you know, could be, you do that, of course, but then you also do omni-channel and you do online. So that's completely changing your business model. The second of the 3 is you change your product. So if you happen to be in the toothbrush business, like Procter & Gamble is with Oral-B, you go smart toothbrushes. If you're in the car business, smart cars, so on and so forth, right? And then the third is internal business operations. So if you do, travel expense reports, the old traditional way of everybody writes their expense report, we send it offshore. If somebody does 3-way expense receipt matching, they use SAP, the best tools in the world. How do you completely disrupt that and do it the way Google does, at 2x the efficiency? Setting those goals in hardcore monetary and people goal terms. So, 2x the improvement, market share of our new smart products in the world. What percent of our business is coming from new business models as opposed to old business models? That's what I mean by strategy. So you set those goals at that level. The execution then, and I'm really glad that you brought up traditional execution versus new methodology that I push, is, if you did the traditional execution, what you would say is, I need a project, I need a project leader, I need some goals, so on and so forth, and I have to make my project successful. One thing I learned from X is they pride themselves on being a project and idea killing machine, which is they will get thousands of ideas. They will pick only roughly 30 projects to work on, like the driverless cars. And any day of the week, they could kill any of those 30 projects, right? But what they are very clear about, just like any portfolio manager is for wealth management, is that you're going to have high risk projects, high return, and then others. But the faster you kill bad ideas, the sooner you end up with a better performing portfolio. That execution methodology is very different from picking a technology, picking milestones, and saying, come hell or high water, I'm going to make this idea, this baby of mine, successful. That's what you have to do.
So the first thing perhaps for companies to do is actually to go and set up from what you've said, a new operating model at the senior level, because there's some questions. I think a lot of people will, resonate that most people know about Google and how it goes and kills 99% of the projects, both in and outside of the X company. Fail fast, small team, startup mentality, agile versus waterfall. What else did we have? 70, 20, 10 in terms of profiles. Or if you're a VC, it's only 6% of your projects that are going to be your 10X initiatives. So there's enough information out there to suggest that it should be quite easy for companies to go and do this type of stuff. 99 times out of 100, what happens is a small group gets set together. Maybe they fly to Silicon Valley. They come up with a few ideas. None of them work. And 6 months later, they're all out on their ear looking for work somewhere else. What do the companies have to do as an operating model to go and set the support to allow the metrics and the systems to be put in place to go and help these people?
You said the key words there, which is they actually have to create an operating model, right? The operating model essentially has to have all of the stages of change management. The reason why you have what you were just describing, which is innovation theater, right? A small group that tries really, really hard, even does successful pilots. And then when they get that back to the core organization, it gets immediately killed along with the careers of, those innovation teams, is because the operating model design, is too focused on creating the disruptive capabilities and not enough focused on essentially driving, scaling change, right? 99% of disruptive innovation is organization change management. So that is the difference, right? Where is the operating model focusing on, right? And so what I had to end up doing at P&G, and which is really a lot of the work that I do today, is to basically, identify the conditions that are required to scale change. Because you're right, the conditions to create change exist. The world has great methodologies there. Scaling change, not so much. So, for example, that gets into things such as reward systems, right? If you're a 180-year-old company, you are not going to change your reward systems to say, hey, take crazy risks, right? What you have to do is a very regimented stage gate system that basically says, first off, I am only going to do disruptive innovations on real business use cases that I have. I'm not going to start with what's possible and then end up with, can I do this at P&G? I'm going to start with, what do I need at P&G? And then I'm going to essentially use building blocks of capabilities that exist out there to design capabilities that I need. I'm going to get the leaders that identify what their needs are to commit that if I meet these success criteria, they are actually going to help me get to the next stage. Yeah? And then iteratively, stage after stage. I am going to essentially have parallel streams of work on essentially training people, on digital literacy. I'm going to have parallel efforts on redesigning organization structures and creating new jobs for people whose jobs are going to change. All of that is part of scaling change methodology.
Does this need to start? Well, actually, before that, now let's continue with that one. How heavily do the executive teams need to get involved on this?
Very.
Because in many ways, as you said, those initial experiments are small and they don't cost often a huge amount of money. It's a whiteboard, some sticky notes, a couple of ideas. And that's not normally the type of conversation that your exco are going to get involved in.
Yes. Very. The answer is very, very involved. And this is, again, another reason to kind of think about all of this disruptive innovation in the context of an industrial revolution and a business strategy, right? So they have to be completely hands-on on these experiments, because their role is not to charter the work. Their role is to essentially put their legacy on the line and put skin in the game on essentially driving the change, right? And that is a very important difference, right? And that's why, a lot of the work that you do and, EXO works, Open EXO, stuff like that's important, because it is aimed at essentially, leadership and board education, and having them understand that in the midst of an industrial revolution, you cannot delegate this type of transformation, right? It has got to be yours. Yeah.
All right, so that's great. EXCO are now involved. They're each sponsoring a project. You mentioned kind of 3 streams. You've got new business opportunities, blue ocean, if you want to go and call it like that. You've got your toothbrush example, where you go from something to a smart toothbrush, and then you've got internal efficiency gains. So we want to go and work on all 3 of these spheres. Some of them are going to be what McKinsey might call Horizon 2, some might be Horizon 3. What do I do now for my team structure to get involved in this? Is this going to be the X company, which is, or a skunk works, or can I rely on the current divisional head of the team that makes toothbrushes to go make these transitions? What's your experience on that?
So I'm going to sound consultant-like, which is not what I am. But the answer is it depends, in the sense that the business model and the culture of every company is different. And so you have to play to, change management strategies. As I was saying, 90% of this is change management. And so, so it depends. If the company's culture is extremely siloed, every division head basically has complete responsibilities, then as the exco, you have to change the reward systems of that division head in the division to make sure that they have, some of those goals of what market share comes from new products, or, what % productivity do you commit to? They've got to cascade to them. And then the actual setup of the teams have got to belong to them, right? Because at the end of the day, the division head is going to have to define what are the biggest pain points and the biggest ideas, and they have got to champion it, right? If your company is much more of a global company, then you can basically say, okay, then I'm going to create a skunkworks like team that essentially then brings in those ideas, right? So again, put that in the context of what's going to be most effective for your company to accept the change. The second point I would make is that what you don't do is, take some really, really whip smart innovation people and put them in the team, right? Because you are going to fail. What you do is you essentially pick your most credible operating leaders. And then as long as they have the mindset that they're open to change, you essentially put them in charge of the, disruptive innovation work. Yeah. Because when you have a person who's known and incredibly credible on product development of, smart capabilities or even other capabilities, when they go out and they say, oh my God, I have to do this differently, they bring their organization along, right? When you have a professional innovator that says, hey, the world's collapsing around us, the rest of the organization says, yes, that's you, right? That's the second tip, which is, construct your disruptive organization incredibly deliberately. Yeah.
I don't remember that point you've just raised being in the book, but I find that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Take your old guard who have plenty of knowledge and experience and ask them to go and start driving some of the innovation strategies with the idea that they can be turned, they can adopt new models, and they will bring, as opposed to going and bringing some 25, 30-year-old straight out of Silicon Valley with all the best ideas about how to use AI who just won't get listened to.
That is absolutely true. And by the way, with the old guard, I mean, you have to be extremely selective there. Some of them are never going to change, and that's fine. Don't touch them. But if you think they're going to change, then you bring them in. And by the way, on top of that, you give them time. You give them 6 months, 9 months. If they're not able to deal with it, then you rotate them out. Yes. And so you've got to be very, very results oriented. You have to say, I have to see, this group essentially start to create products that drives, sales or profits or, productivity, to these numbers, again, like a venture capitalist. Otherwise, I'm going to do something different, right?
You mentioned venture capital, so that's really good. Let's go through the next stage gate. So old guard person A goes off on a trip to Silicon Valley. He sets up some new metrics. He gets comfortable with running, let's call it a 70-30-10 or whatever model you want to go and use, i.e. most of them are going to fail, 30% to kind of be okay, and maybe 1 or 2, if you're lucky, are going to be exponential. Gets the team together, they start running. They're 2 months in, they've got some great ideas that are being developed. You've actually got a system for that, which I think you've described as 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. Can you just talk through how that works?
Yes. So here's just as context. Here's the dilemma in companies, right? Here's the difference between working in a company, a regular company, and working in a startup. In a startup, your constraint is money. When the money runs out, your company is dead. And so you have a sense of urgency to get stuff done. In a large company, money, and I don't care, how money constrained people in companies believe they are. Money is not the problem. Your problem is time. You are too slow, right? And so what we did was created this artificial constraint called, again, an exponential series, which we pulled out of a year. I mean, there's some judgment to it, but it's not scientific. Call this, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. And the what we did was, as part of our execution methodology, we said, you have a maximum of 1 month to take a pain point or a business imperative, which one of the division heads says, I have to get this solved, and come out with a big idea, right, on how you're going to come out, how we're going to do a moonshot about it, right? Of course, in working with Silicon Valley and, startups and stuff like that. So it's got to have some substance to it. You have 2 months to essentially then create a working prototype, right? Which essentially constrains you. You can't do upstream innovation in 2 months. So it's going to be applied innovation by design, yeah. You have got 4 months to essentially do a successful pilot, a live pilot within your organization. You have got 8 months after that to get this completely deployed in the company. If at any of those times, any of your success criteria, including this doesn't pay out, the organization immune system is resisting it, or you run out of time, then the project's dead, okay? So this creates pressure to stay focused on goals. And again, what you're testing is the technology ready? You're testing, am I going to get the returns? And maybe the product is absolutely brilliant, your idea is brilliant, but the company's change management system and reward system and immune system says, I don't want it. You kill the idea, right? So you're extremely business-like with all of these.
So would you say that's more of a VC sort of model? Because some might look at that and feel that we've got some deadlines in there, some critical path thinking. It feels like we're heading a bit waterfally. Now, I know that that's always a bit like Land Rover versus Toyota. There's extreme views on both sides.
Yeah.
But what's your view? I mean, in terms of how you apply agile for the innovative, iterative thinking that you need in a structure that you've just explained is quite rigid?
So I think that the trick is that the outcome structure is extremely rigid and disciplined, right? And I would say, I mean, our inspiration for this was essentially the venture capitalist community. And they come from the background of the financial community, which wealth management and investing and everybody else uses. So all we're doing is essentially using their thinking, right? So that is extremely rigid in terms of their milestones. But you know that venture capitalists and the finance industry are also extremely agile in what they do on a day-to-day basis. So, how long should you hold on to a security and an equity or, or fund or whatever it is? They could be doing day trading. I mean, it could be microseconds or it could be years, right? And it's completely driven by the outcomes that you're after. So that's my framework here as well, right? I'm not preaching that you are going to do this project using waterfall methodology or you're going to use agile methodology. What I'm saying is I need to see the outcome. I need to see a working prototype. If you choose to spend 90% of your time, creating that particular prototype in a completely waterfall-y way, and then 10% and you show me the results, I'm fine, right? So I think we have to your point, you have to kind of get out of the orthodoxy of Toyota versus Land Rover. You just have to be goals oriented.
You talked about budget and 70-20-10, and I guess budget in terms of resources and capital. What sort of, how important is it that Exco verbally and at a board level go and allocate funds very visibly for these type of initiatives, especially kind of the fail fast 9 and 10 are going to flop type piece? Or should they be keeping it quiet, running it silently, allocating some money, quite quietly with their divisional heads who they trust, with the hope that every now and then something springs up and they've got this wonderful new product, new efficiency for the organization?
I strongly believe that this has got to be open and transparent, because it has got to be a business strategy, right? And the second reason is, as an exco, what you're trying to do is you are trying to empower your 10x people with not just money and stuff like that, but also accountability, because you're trying to build their credibility that they're not ivory tower people. So you're trying to say, I am going to openly give you, whatever it is, $100, but I'm also openly going to share that you gave back to me $1,000 this year and $2,000 next year, so on and so forth, right? And that's important to build the credibility and for people to see that these aren't strange people that think and act differently, that they are essentially part of our business and operating model, as you said, to bring change in.
Okay, so we've got some budget allocated. The board's convinced. We've got our horizon 1 to 3. I'm heading up an operational area. And I've agreed. I'm taking 10% out of my budget to go and allocate on hyper efficiency models. I've started assembling the teams. We've gone through. We're 2 months in. The ideas are great. We've decided on, 4 prototypes that we're going to start working with. We think we can spin them up way quicker than 8 months. We're 6 months in. I've got this magic system. I don't know what it's for. You mentioned payments. So we're not going to go and do invoicing. We're going to go and use AI to go and completely revolutionize the way that we do procurement and invoicing. And at some point, we look at it and go, this is never going to work. There's inherent bias in the system, and our customers, as we've realized, hate it. They prefer the personal touch, and it's causing a disaster. We're killing it. How do I get promoted from that? Because it's the right decision in the model that you've explained. And I don't hear of people often ending up in that we're going to kill it phase. They prefer to kind of move it on and give it to someone else to go and fail with.
Yes. So what you're talking about then is the reward systems, right? So, we come from, this is the execution methodology part of why digital transformations fail, which is we use traditional project management, PMI, Project Management Institute ways of doing these projects, right? And that's insufficient. because what you need to be doing is you have to be using more the venture capitalist portfolio approach or the financial manager portfolio approach with those reward systems. So what people have got to be seeing is that, this disruptive innovation organization was given $100 and then they have turned out $1,000, right? What they have to see is that, they worked on 10 projects and they killed 9 of them, but the 10th one gave them all the money, right? And this is basically what your financial advisor does as well. I mean, they have a portfolio and you reward them not for switching in and out of securities that were not performing, but for the outcomes, right? And that doesn't exist. And I'm really glad you're asking this question, Colin, because this is an important education for EXCO members. Do you have that reward system instilled in that part of the organization that's doing disruptive? I mean, when you have people that are doing day in, day out accounting, you cannot use that process to say, okay, fine, it doesn't matter if you got 9 invoices right, but you got the 10th one great, and I'm going to promote you for it. So different parts of organizations have got to have different reward systems. For this particular arm of disruptive innovation, you have to be extremely clear on what the reward systems are. And you have to visibly reward them for the churn of the portfolio to help keep the total picture financially healthy.
It's a question that came on here from Tristan, which I think could be quite relevant for a lot of the people on the call. There's lots of advisors and consultants, but how do you actually go into a client with its own culture and its own model and try to convince them of a lot of what we're talking about, particularly around this transformation between, you've got the kind of PMI model, which is all about delivery. It's linear. You can do it efficiently, but you don't go into that saying we're not going to ever deliver that project. Yeah. Versus a portfolio approach where you're going and say we are guaranteeing 90% of the portfolio is not going to survive because we're continually churning.
Yeah. In my mind, and this is really something that we have to be very, very clear about. This approach only does work top down. So, if you're going into an IT organization that's running projects and you're saying, well, wait a minute, if you want to be the IT organization of the future, you have to use a portfolio management approach. And you're pitching this at the middle management level, you're probably going to get thrown out on your year, and that's it, right? So you really, really have to do this, unfortunately, only top down, because you're going to need all of the support, not just of a quote unquote mandate, but changes in reward systems and uncomfortable conversations and people getting rotated out of assignments and a whole bunch of really, really nasty things during execution. So even the first conversation really, really needs to be top down. And you have to work methodically, right? So as I said, the first thing is you have to convince people that you do need 3 parts to their business strategy, day-to-day operations, the continuous improvement, and disruption. Then you have to work them methodically to what are the goals that they want, what are the outcomes, what's the portfolio outcome. And then you can go in and talk about failing fast. See, the problem is, when Silicon Valley talks about fail fast and stuff like that, 99% of the world that works in routine jobs looks at this and said, what are you talking about, right? I work in accounting. There is no failing fast. You either succeed or you fail, right? So you always have to put this in context. Otherwise, you're going to have a language issue.
Sean, are you going to join us just to close out? Have I got that right? Is my timing right? Sean, there you are. You're on mute. While Sean's working out how to turn off mute, I'm going to just post.
I think you tried to unmute me and it was blocking mine.
Sean, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, thanks for your participation, which is, I understand, sadly the last episode of season 2. I'd like to thank you, Tony, for it's a fantastic insight. I'm fascinated by disruptive technology. I think it took telephones 50 years to reach 50 million users, and my son can do a TikTok video and reach 1.5 million people within a matter of days. So I find all of this absolutely fascinating and a complete challenge, sort of managing the team that I manage. Colin, thanks for your facilitation. I thought some great questions. So absolutely insightful hour. Thanks, Tony. Can I just
thank you. My pleasure.
Can I just thank and mention some of our clients that participated today? We had over 200 participants, which is great. People such as Apollo, Nedbank, Tiger Brands, Old Mutual, some of the biggest companies in South Africa. So you really hit a great audience. I'd also like to thank some of our speakers from the other parts of the series. Previously, India, Gary Martin from New York. We had our own CEO, Stephen Van Coller. We had Gina Bianchini from Los Angeles and Andrew Baker from ABSA. So we've had a sort of great lineup of speakers. And on average, we had well over 200 participants per week, about a third of those being EOH clients. So it's been great. Some of the feedback, and I saw some great feedback in the chat for you today, Tony. And previously, we've had comments such as thought-provoking, inspiring, refreshing, insightful, great advice and guidance, love the different way of approaching things, authentic speakers, great topics. And, I think today has just added to it. So it's been a truly, truly interesting day. Anyway, if you missed some of these episodes or you want to go back and see this session with Tony again, or you want other people to watch it, then it'll be on the website, which is ioko.tech. So I'd just like to sort of close by thanking everybody. It wouldn't have been possible without you all. I think it's been fascinating, and we look forward to seeing you in the new series in 2021. Thank you again, Tony, and thanks to all of you who participated.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you very much. If you're, you can dial off now. If you want to leave a quick comment before you go, that's fine. I'll leave the call open just for 30 seconds so you can share your feedback, and hope to see you in some time next year.